ever since first meeting Fred, when I had my first traction engine, or the traction engine, and after making that television commercial for beer called Right Said Fred, we became good friends, and never a week went by without him phoning up with some fantastical idea or invention or something he wanted to go and see. And he liked being driven around, never wanted to drive himself, apart from his clapped out old Land Rover, which he considered the most modern piece of technology. It was as if he'd been born into this modern world that he didn't really want to be in. And he was like something out from Victorian times, as Donald used to say, who worked with him. He said he was like Rip Van Winkle. And as his great friend Bill Greenhalgh used to say, it was like driving the Queen around, because he never had any money, so you always had to buy him a pint, etc. Anyway, to cut a long story short, not long after our first meeting, and I had this traction engine, he phoned me up and said, "Listen, Cock," he said, "I've been invited to head up a Rose Queen festival in a town near you." He said, "And it's too far for me to bring the steamroller over, so why don't we use your engine and we can use that, and I'll come over." So I said, "Right." So on that particular morning, I got up very early and polished the engine, drew the ash pan out, cleaned all the tubes, and Fred turned up and we got her all steamed up. But we didn't get her steamed up because it was one of those very still mornings, and for some reason the fire wouldn't really draw. It was just a lazy fire with smoke just sort of idling up out of the chimney into the trees. And whatever we did, we couldn't get that fire to draw. He said, "It's this bloody cold round here in Cheshire." He said, "If it had brought bloody coal from Bolton, it would have worked, proper steam coal." So I said, "No, it's nothing to do with the coal, Steve, Fred." I said, "I've been using this coal now for months and it's perfectly all right." Anyway, time was getting on and the Rose Queen was supposed to be setting off at 12 o'clock, and it was nearly 11 o'clock and we had about 3 or 4 miles to go. So we decided, just with the needle just off I think we had about 20 or 30 pounds when we should have had 150 pounds steam pressure. We decided to trundle off with the engine barely moving. And Fred said, well, he said, with it rattling over the ground, it will loosen up the fire and we should get more steam. Anyway, we trundled along and then suddenly realised we were running out of water from the tender. And I tried to inject some, and there was just nothing but a hissing of steam. And of course we'd used all the water. So luckily there was we passed a house with a fish pond, so we asked the lady if we could take water from a fish pond, and she was quite reluctant, but in the end let us take some. And of course we put the big pipe in and turned the steam on, and there was a gurgling and steam all over the place, and the whole pond seemed to disappear into the engine, and just black mud at the bottom with a few fish flopping about. And this poor woman nearly did her nuts, saying her husband just put the pond in and it was the pride of his life and there were special fish. So we decided to put some water back in the pond from a tap, from a hose, and we said we'd call on the way back. Then a fire engine turned up, wondering what all the steam was, and said, did we want a tow? So we said no, we're perfectly all right. Then he couldn't start the engine of the fire engine, that stopped. So then we said, do you want us to tow you, the fire engine? And they said, no, it isn't a good thing to be seen in a fire engine being towed by a traction engine. He said, that's not very good for the fire service, is it? So anyway, we trundled off, and then we started to run out of water again. I don't know why we were running out of water, but we seemed to be short of water, so we stopped at the local duck pond and took some in from there, to the indignation of all the quacking ducks and all the steam. By the time we got to the point where all the procession was lined up with the brass band and the Rose Queen with the white rose petals and the retiring Post Queen all on these floats, they put us at the back, back of the Rose Queen, and we said, no, we want to be at the front. This was the arrangement. So Fred said, it was arranged we would be to lead the procession. So the woman said, well, you can go behind the band. So we drew up behind the band. I think it was the Air Cadets band, and I was trying to get some more steam up, and Fred was chatting away to this woman, and all of a sudden a whistle blew and the band struck up this march and set off. So we set off with a clunk and a bit of steam. Fred came running along and somebody nicked his cap, so he was bald-headed and he was most upset because you don't see Fred without a cap on. Anyway, He didn't want anybody to recognise him as Fred, and he didn't without his cap on. He looks totally different. So we trundled up this road, and the band marched out onto the main street, and we trundled and chunked and clunked behind him round the corner, and there was a slight hill. So then I opened the regulator, the throttle, to put some more steam in, and there was a most awful gurgling noise and a horrible whomping noise, and this like a plume of black soup spurted up out of the chimney, and it went up to about 20 feet in height. And Fred said, "Oh shit, it's primed." Now when a steam engine primed, it means that for some reason something's happened inside it, generally with dirty water or not enough steam pressure. So instead of steam going up and smoke, it blows this black, sooty black water up. And this plume went up to about 20 feet and then seemed to flatten out like a ragged pancake. And it all happened in slow motion. We both looked up and we saw this thing come down. There was a police car on one side. There was a white police car. That went all mottled black. And there's a poor little guy with a whole festoon of balloons on, the silver balloons on this side. We could always see with his legs underneath. They went black, and he started running around whimpering, wondering what the hell had gone wrong. And the worst thing that happened was the whole black plume had landed on the Rose Queen, and she went black, and all the little rose petals went black. And all the cheering mothers there to see their little darlings go past went berserk and started screaming and shouting. Fred disappeared out of the way because he didn't want to be seen. I took all the stick, and there was a big row about it, and we were relegated to the back of the procession and never invited again. So there.